Hello and welcome to episode 35 of the Icario podcast. This is part 2 of my recent conversation with Abby. And in this one, we dive into some potentially controversial topics. The big picture here is still that we're talking about goal achievement, about how to reach your goals, but also more like how to live a better life overall. And on that topic, we dive into masculinity and toxic masculinity and the problems that men face in their personal development, among other things. We also once again touch upon how the kind of digital environment we find ourselves in, how this can affect our development and how it can be detrimental, how things that seem completely normal to us are actually part of the human zoo or something that really keeps us imprisoned and encaged. And so like last time, we are basically exploring what it means to actually be a free human being who lives a great life. So I think you'll find this really interesting, and I would love to hear your thoughts and comments and feedback on these kinds of topics. And if there's anything else that you would like us to take a deeper dive into, or maybe invite some guests to cover some of these topics as well. So you can find the show notes for this episode, as well as a way to leave a comment by going to icario.com/035 for episode 35. That's icario.com/035. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Let's get right into it.
Yeah, so the last thing we were talking about was the skill gap, right? And how the result that we often want is actually the byproduct of the skills that we want, right? So when you were mentioning that, in my mind, what came up was, for example, people somehow, I think people understand this inherently when it comes to something like a job, right? It's very no-brainer that the higher skill you have in a particular job, the higher you're going to get paid. But similarly, I find that thinking doesn't kind of transfer over in things that you want out of life.
I think that part of the problem is marketing and our thirst for shortcuts. Because, this is a problem. So for some of the listeners know, right? One of my businesses is a software company, and we sell basically marketing related software. And one of the issues in this space is that a lot of people come into online marketing, start an online business because they were sold some kind of a pipe dream. So it's like, even though what we're trying to do is we're trying to sell software, like useful software for people who have an online business, right? In a way, there's always like a portion of customers who are kind of in it for the wrong reasons. And yeah, if you're basically told these stories of, this kid started a website and now he's a millionaire, and this grandma made $5 million with Facebook ads or whatever, you're given all these stories of like quick instant success. All you need is the secret formula, right? That's one of the easiest ways to sell something, is you identify something that people have a strong desire for, and you say, actually, the only thing that's missing, the only reason you don't have this yet is you're missing the secret formula, right? Stop struggling, just use the secret formula for instant success. And so that draws a lot of people in. And that is, I think, one of the things that takes people's eyes off the prize, or like you say, it's kind of no-brainer. Yeah, of course you have to get better at stuff and then you succeed, right? I think one of the things that takes people's eyes off the ball in that sense is all these stories of quick instant success, use the secret formula. So then they're kind of in this, they have these wrong expectations, and they're also in a mode of constantly seeking the right secret formula instead of just putting in the work, right? And I think that's true in many other areas as well. It's like in the fitness industry, it's the same, right? It's like the best-selling fitness programs all have the premise of, insane fitness transformation in 30 days, right? It's like only 30 days get ripped to shreds, only 18-minute workout a day or something, It's always the super quick and easy success. And the only way you can sell it really is to say this is a secret formula, because it's like, clearly, if it was common knowledge, then everybody would do this, right? So you have to say this is some kind of a secret formula, right? And people get kind of taken in by this. And I think that's something that leads us to take our eyes off the prize. Or, where somehow maybe that expectation is just not there in the job market. Nobody's trying to tell you, hey, the secret formula to becoming the CEO right away is this, right? In fact, the story that serves that market is to say, no, you just have to put in long hours, work hard, don't ask questions, right? Essentially that whole area of life is incentivized to tell a story that gets people to just knuckle down and work overtime without complaining. That's the story that's beneficial to tell there. So I think that's part of the problem. It's like the wrong expectations. And then there's also stuff where I think it doesn't occur to people that it's a matter of skill. It doesn't occur to people, and we're never taught these things. I think about things like it's like social skills. Like there was never a shadow of an idea of teaching social skills in any context that I was ever in, which is quite difficult. I was very socially awkward. I mean, I still kind of am, but I've learned social skills now, so most people don't notice. But that this is a skill set that you can, the same thing, right? You learn the skill and you get good at it. I think in many cases, or at least for me, that was an example where it took me a long time to realize that, So I guess it's something, the idea that, look, it's you got to put in the work, you got to practice, you get good, and then eventually you get the result because of how skilled you are. That's something that is like, we know that, but we only know it about a limited set of things. Whereas for me, I've started applying this idea to just everything. I just see everything in terms of skills now.
Yeah, I think this is a much, I was looking for a different word, but it definitely is a much better way of looking at it, right? Because now anything that you look at, like, okay, I would like to have that result. The next question in mind goes, okay, well, what are the skills that I need that will produce that result?
Yeah.
So, okay, so these are the skills. Well, okay, so what can I do to practice this skill?
Yeah.
Like, well, 30 days of whatever, right?
Yeah.
Whatever the case may be.
And there's also an element in this of, like, let's say stoic. It's a stoic idea in here, which is that you want to basically spend your time and energy on things that you have actual control over. And with things that you don't have control over, you want to just, what you're going to do, right? There's no point worrying about them. There's no point trying to change something you can't change. So you want to kind of keep your energy focused on things that are in your control, and skills are in your control. And I think that's really important, because it doesn't mean that only skills matter, Like, again, if you think about something like social skills, like I mentioned before, of course there are other things that matter in social interactions, but skill is the thing that you have control over. So I think it's a useful perspective because of that.
Interesting. Controlling the controllables.
Mm-hmm.
And so one thing that you mentioned about how in marketing, like, easy sells, comfort sells, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think to a certain degree, this is what I personally believe. I don't know how true this is, but I do believe that deep down, we all know when we're being bullshitted, right? It's just we want to believe. Like, it's like X-Files. I want to believe the truth is out there. I just didn't know the 3 steps to being a millionaire.
Yeah.
Finally, right? Like, there were some ads. I do a lot of I keep tabs on the types of ads people run. There was one I saw lately. It's like, copy paste my 7-figure e-com business today. Like, dude, fuck off.
What a ridiculous idea. What makes you think you can copy paste someone's business? Like, Yeah.
It's what Seth Godin calls, right? Race to the bottom. Like, how do we make it easier and easier and easier? The next one's going to be click here and I'll come to your house and do it for you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's crazy. But yeah, I think you're right. For sure, this would be the desirability bias, right? We have a tendency to believe things that we want to believe. We like to believe things where it's like, well, if only it were like that, how nice would it be, right? So yeah, I think that's definitely plays into it.
It's true. And when you said that, like, we like to believe things we want to be true.
Yeah.
Aliens came to mind. I definitely believe they're out there.
You want to believe in aliens, yeah. For some 100%. Reason, the thing that came to mind for me was like, thinking about like we talked about the fitness industry. I was thinking about the fitness example. Like if only there was like, oh, there's just this one thing. Oh, just take this one supplement and you'll just be like you'll just look amazing, right? Don't change anything else. Just take this supplement and just grow huge muscles. You'll be ripped, amazing, right? If only it was that, dude. If only it was one supplement that I'm not taking yet.
The supplement stuff is I find it, to be honest, like quite baffling. The word supplement itself means it is there to supplement the work you're putting in or whatever the hell.
You don't get it, bro. You got to take this pre-workout.
Those things are crazy. I remember when I initially got into working out, I did the cycle on-off thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I was they don't make that same pre-workout anymore, but I would take it and I could break down walls. Like, it was insane. I would lift everything.
Seriously.
And the first time I worked out without it, oh my God, the amount of demotivation.
What the fuck did they put in
inability. I have no idea. Since I bought that, they changed the ingredients of that. I think they reduced the caffeine and took out a few things. And it's just not the same anymore. Like, I miss the good old days when you could run through walls. It was crazy.
Yeah, I never got into pre-workout. I was never that much of a meathead, unfortunately.
No. That was the experience that made me think, okay, I can't do this. Like, this is not cool. Like, I would rather enjoy the workout because I enjoy it versus some crazy chemicals.
Just being hyped out of your mind because you ingested something.
Yeah. It's like pounding on my chest like King Kong.
Well, that makes me want to have some of that pre-workout, actually. You're advertising this well.
I mean, I was going to say the name, but I'd rather not.
No, that's not.
Yeah. Okay, I want to get on the marketing stuff for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of ties into, I guess, happiness as well and what we're told, right? So, like, for example, the message, I might be biased because I'm one of those hard mode kind of guys who does wake up in the morning and like beats his chest and goes like, "Rah, I'm gonna attack the day."
Mm-hmm.
I don't do, not entirely, but like there are these messages that are given out like, "Oh, you're good enough as you are. Nothing is wrong with you. You deserve to be happy," and all this other fluffy, it's bullshit to me. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Maybe I'm overly harsh. But in my view, like, these are empty statements that are almost like rationalizations for why there are no results in your life, right? So this sort of mentality and an outcome of this is something like Twitter and the mob justice thing that happens. As soon as there's something that you don't like, you throw a tantrum or a fit and somebody else takes care of it for you, right? Like, before it used to be exclusively the government because that's what you would rebel against. Now you just rebel against whatever the hell you want to rebel against on Twitter and somebody takes care of it for you. Now, going back to the fitness example, I'm going to use the being overweight example because I personally used to be obese. I'm 5'6" for context. I'm not a very tall person. I used to be probably wider than I was taller. I mean, that's probably not true, but you know what I'm saying. Like, right?
We got the picture, yeah.
Yeah. And this is an entirely solvable problem, right? I never, when somebody would make fun of me and say, "Hey, why are you so fat?" or whatever, it didn't go through my mind that I'm being shamed. What went through my mind was like, this is incentive to improve my life and be better, right? So, for example, it's an entirely solvable problem, barring any medical conditions or whatever. Just eat less bullshit and walk a bit more every now and then. Now, because of the marketing angles that we were discussing, now what's easier to sell? Like, you're perfect the way you are, nothing's wrong with you, or, you know, get off your ass and go make shit happen. Now, so, okay, I guess long-windedly what I'm coming at is like anything in life that makes you happy. I guess just to wrap up that obesity example, I lost in a span of, I think, 2 years, I lost 90 pounds and became lean and chiseled as hell. And it was the greatest feeling ever because people would come up to me and be like, "Oh my God, how did you do that?" And I thought they were making fun of me, but no, they were truly inspired, right? So that was something that I really hold close to my heart as a accomplishment, because it took me a long time, and I used to be obese for such a long time, and that gave me genuine happiness. But when I used to hear shit like, "Oh, dude, you're fine the way you are," and then I would believe it, and I'd go out clubbing and be kind of clueless, like, I wonder why the girls are not interested in me, because nothing's wrong with me, right? I'm perfect the way I am. So I'm trying to tie in everything. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, well, I think there's quite a lot to unpack there, because so I agree with you that when I see this kind of, this like a generic message just like posted on the internet, it's, "Oh, you're perfect the way you are, you're loved," whatever. It's like, it's a bit sad. It's a bit sad because it clearly people have a need for this. People have a need to be seen and accepted. And it's like, if you have to like go to the internet where someone anonymously posts a message addressed to everyone to get that, that's really sad, because I think you should be getting that from people who are close to you. Which is, I'm not blaming the people making those things or the people consuming them. I'm just saying, like, the fact that this is around seems to be a sign that something is going wrong somewhere else, you know? And yeah, like I said, it's quite a lot of stuff that you touched on that I think is relevant. I mean, one is, okay, with obesity and fat shaming. Well, first of all, I think that there's like two sides to this, which is, one is like what environment are we in, and the other is how resilient are we. And right now, at least, it seems like woke culture on the internet, and interestingly also anti-woke culture, right? Arguably the only thing more fragile than someone who's super woke is someone who's super anti-woke, right? It's like they just like shatter into pieces at the smallest thing that they disagree with. But there seems to be this strong tendency online for these groups to form where you have this, I don't know, this coddling. It's essentially this coddling, right? So where it's like you have like whatever safe spaces, and you can't say this and you can't say that, and you have to ask someone's pronouns before you address them and all this kind of stuff, right? Where it's like, the intention behind that, I think, is good, because you're basically saying, look, there are people struggle with all kinds of things. Like you don't know what someone's gone through, and you don't want to be trampling over someone who's already on their last leg, you know. And I think it can happen. I mean, it can definitely happen that without intending to, you maybe say something or you make a comment or something that just absolutely destroys someone because they're already, they're already struggling so much, right? But I think the problem is that, you can definitely take this too far, because really, you definitely want to live in a world where people aren't being mean to each other and people aren't being bullied and stuff like that. But you also want to live in a world where people are not so fragile. So ideally, you shouldn't be so bloody fragile. Or at least for me, that's the ideal, right? I am more interested in becoming someone who can deal with whatever happens than in trying to create a world where there's no sharp edge anywhere where I could maybe bump against, you know? It's like you said, it's like ideally if someone makes a joke about you being a fat ass, I mean, hopefully it's a good joke, right? That's often the problem also with bullying. It's like, oh, I'm just kidding, bro. Well, why isn't it funny then? Right? But if someone makes a good joke that maybe touches on something that you're sensitive about, like ideally you want to be resilient enough to just say, yeah, fine. Okay. Right. It's like, yeah, if I'm fat and you call me fat, you're just stating the truth. You want to be able to you want to be able to see things as they are. And if there are indeed people who are easily triggered by all kinds of things, I think that the solution isn't to put a trigger warning on everything, or that strikes me as not the ideal solution. Like, the ideal solution is to think about how come this person is so fragile, and what can we do to strengthen this person? How can we make sure, and also like on a bigger picture, it's like, how can we make sure that we create a system that creates resilient people? We've talked about this on the team as well a couple of times. It's like there's this kind of, if you've ever worked on a building site, there's often like a lot of swearing and a lot of kind of insults being tossed around everywhere. And that can be very toxic. But I think many examples, or at least examples of this that I've experienced, are actually very friendly. It's like everybody's having friendly jabs at each other and so on. And everyone is very blunt with each other. But really, when someone throws an insult your way, they're not trying to hurt you. They're actually just inviting you to play. They're like, throwing that insult at you. And the idea is you throw one back. And, can you be witty? Can you say something? Can you turn it on them, right? That's the game that's being played. And I would much rather be in an environment where everyone's super blunt with each other and everyone's like jokingly throwing insults about, and everyone's okay with that, than to be in an environment where everybody's like walking on eggshells all the time, right? And ideally, there can also arise some like useful truth out of that, because that can be the environment where someone can tell you, listen, I love you, bro, but you're a fat ass and it's your fault. And maybe that's what you need to hear. Like sometimes that is what you need to hear. But then let me also say another thing about this. The way I see this, if you look at these two approaches, right? One of them is, dude, you're fat, get off your ass, do something, It's kind of the brutal truth, right? The kind of Big Brother type approach. And I mean that not in terms of Big Brother is watching you. I mean like older brother, right? Older brother who's just like telling you like it is, but also kind of in a loving way. That's the one thing. The other thing is this kind of, you're perfect the way you are. Don't worry about it. You're loved. You're blah, 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 right? Look, I think everybody needs both of those things. I think that's the truth of it. I think that just like we need intensity and rest, right? We need intensity and rest. You need times where you go, okay, now I'm going hard. I'm doing something super difficult. It's like I'm expending my energy. And then after a period of doing that, I need to rest. And I need to be able to relax. And I need to not have to perform. And then I can be intense again, and so on. And I think similarly, that we basically need both of those things. It's like we need to be able to go out into the world, and the world sometimes knocks us around, and maybe someone tells us something unpleasant that is also true. And then we need to come back to, and this is a role that originally our parents play for us, hopefully, and in other contexts or later on, other people in our close social circle, we basically have to be able to return to the nest where someone can tell us, it's fine. And it doesn't always have to be, because the two sides of this, if we stay with the obesity example, is that on the one hand, someone can tell you the brutal truth. They listen, you're fat, it's your fault, do something about it. And that can be motivating, but maybe it can also sometimes be a bit much to deal with. And then you can come back, and in a different context, someone can tell you, okay, it takes time, right? You're not going to lose weight from one moment to the next. If this is something you really want, you can. I believe in you. But also, by the way, you can also continue being fat. That's fine too. Like, nobody actually cares. You know what I mean? It's like, and I think that the truth is we need both. Ideally, you get both. You get intensity and you get rest. You get, performing and recovering. So this is basically my response to kind of the squabbling about which is right, which side is right. Are the woke people right who are putting trigger warnings on everything, or are the anti-woke people right who are shouting about freedom and whatnot? freedom of speech. You know, I think that basically the conflict. I think and I think this about many things. So maybe that's just my whatever. Feel free to criticize my centrism here or something. But I often feel like the debate that's being paraded in front of us is missing the point.
Yeah, I think what you're trying to say is like these are two sides to the same coin, right? Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, it probably did sound like I was trying to advocate for no, which is like go up to everyone and be like, no, listen, you're fat. Go fucking fix your life. No, obviously not, right? Yeah, but there is a point to why I was bringing that up, and the point was like this is a traditionally masculine trait, like for example, the way you describe the construction workers, and they say something like, "Hey, dickhead," or whatever, right? Imagine being the guy who takes offense in that scenario. Like, oh man, you will never hear the end of it from everyone else, right? You don't want to be that guy. So at that point, or in that scenario, you want to learn to toughen up, have a bit of thick skin, and be like, okay, I'm gonna get this bastard next time, right? That's what goes through your mind. Now, the reason I use this specific example is because it comes back to the thing you were mentioning about controlling what you can control. You can control what you eat. You can, like, even in the How to Get Your Shit Together series that you guys did, like, there's a reason why step one is physical. It's often the maybe easiest is the wrong choice of word, but it's the one that's you have most control over immediately. I can choose not to eat chips today. Yeah. Right. Doesn't mean I'm giving them up today. Just for today, I won't do it, so I'll feel better, right? And build on that momentum. Which is also something I think you were mentioning when you discussed how pursuing a skill over time you become so good at it. It's because you have so much momentum in that direction, right? Now, with the controversial thing that you teased, so this is how it ties in. So I find, my experience, I've done a bit of dabbling in like red pill stuff and whatnot, and eventually my conclusion was these guys are just very resentful, and instead of choosing to do something about this, they choose to complain. Yeah. And that's just not and something that doesn't appeal to me. I'm not somebody who likes complaining. Yeah. Maybe just for a bit of context, like red pill is like a community of, it comes from the Matrix originally, right? Take the red pill to see the truth. Yeah. But as I understand it, it's mostly bitter men who are like, the truth is all women are terrible and you have to like this kind of thing, right? Yeah. It really paints women in a negative picture. Like, for example, Ryan and I, he's on the team, we both read the book The Rational Male at the same time. And the way I like to read, I read 10 pages a day and then I go on with my life. And this guy got sucked in. He read the whole thing. And he's like, dude, women are crazy. I'm like, what are you talking about? Where is this coming from, right? And he's like, yeah, I'm feeling so much resentment towards women and whatnot. And I read more of the book. I eventually read just half of it and tossed it, essentially. Because I was starting to feel the same thing. And I would walk around and thinking, oh, look at her. Like, so privileged. And there's no, she has no idea how difficult it is to be a man person, right? You do get bitter. And I watched some content about it. The problem is, I feel like those guys, they expect that women are somehow, like, they're not just as human as we are. Therefore, any of their mistakes should be magnified 1,000 times. And look, it was because they hate men, and it's just not true. Yeah. And I mean, I think that a lot of this stuff, look, to be honest, I have a lot of empathy for people in these circles. I think that a lot of this stuff, like red pill and men going their own way and this, MGTOW and whatnot, it has, and I say this with a lot of affection, but it has very strong upset toddler energy, right? It's like someone's been hurt, and it is like that inner toddler who kind of can't deal with it. The only thing they can do is like cry in desperate frustration, and just be angry. They're so angry at the person who hurt them. And then that is extended to include just all females. And
And like I understand that pain very well, but it is essentially that like toddler level reaction. It's a very immature reaction, and it's really just like obviously it ends up making you feel better if you just feel like, well, all forms of superiority, right? Superiority is always like, whether it's like white supremacy or something like essentially that's the misogyny or something, it's always an easy out, because you can say, look, by birthright, I am better and I am right, and nobody can take that away from me. And you're so indignant and angry about it. So I get it, but it is essentially a toddler outburst, I think.
Fair enough. Like in my mind, I think I equated that to complaining. That's what I called it, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just not appealing to me. Like, I think very much in terms of you. Like, okay, situation foobar. Fair enough. What can I control? Let's go control that. Yeah. But okay, so the reason I've been bringing, I know I'm touching on like anything and everything right now, and it's because I'm trying to build this picture of what I think you mean when you said it at the very beginning of the previous episode of this podcast. When you look at an animal that's caged, you just feel sorry for it, right? So would it be correct to say that this is some form of a depiction of the human zoo that we're in?
Yeah, well, I would say that it can be, because so if we're talking specifically about the red pill stuff, I mean, a community like that, that's just one example of what you could call like a radicalized community, where it is an expression of the human zoo, because we have a far greater number of radicalized communities. So communities with like fringe beliefs or just like extreme worldviews. So that includes conspiracy stuff, which I've mentioned in previous episodes, has made a few people angry, right? But the reason we have this kind of stuff, the reason we have, and this is going to be me, saying something that's an unpleasant truth, but I believe it is a truth. It's like essentially things like MGTOW and red pill, especially more extreme forms of that, essentially belong in the same category as QAnon and anti-vax and flat earth and millions of other splinter groups of just very extreme beliefs, where people end up in these tiny, very tightly controlled bubbles. And there's usually a radicalization pathway. So that leads from something like someone, got stood up on a date, and they look for a video, how do I not get stood up on a date on YouTube? And the recommendation algorithm, which is trying to maximize how much attention or how much time this person spends on YouTube, will recommend more and more extreme stuff. And so in this example, right, we have someone who's right now feeling hurt because he got stood up on a date. And originally he just wants to find some advice. How do I make sure this doesn't happen again? Or why do women do this or something? And gets shown things that really feed into this anger. The truth about women who stand you up, they're all whores. and then here's the scientific truth that shows that women are terrible and blah, 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 right? And so then that feeds into that. In that moment, you're like, yeah, fuck them. How dare they do this to me, right? It feeds that emotion. And it shoves people down these radicalization pipelines into more and more extreme views. So you go from, hey, I'm a bit upset because I got stood up on a date, to all women are terrible, and I'm never going to marry, and I'm only going to use women. I'm going to manipulate them and use them, but I'm never going to treat them well. And that is something that happens because if you're in one of these radicalized bubbles, you're a very, very highly engaged user of an online platform. That's basically what it comes down to, right? It's like this system has just found a way to serve you more ads. and it happens to fuck you up, right? It happens to fuck up your entire worldview and make you miserable, and possibly also tear apart the fabric of our society, as Chamath has put it. But hey, ad revenue is important, right? So in that sense, yes, it is an expression of the human zoo. It's like this stuff exists because of this kind of somewhat dystopian, some of the more dystopian aspects of the world that we happen to live in. And it is a form of the human zoo because in a more humane context, something much better would have happened. In a more humane context, you would have been able to express your resentment and your pain of being stood up to other people in your social circle, maybe some mentor figures, right? Maybe some older men who can empathize with you and say, yes, I know that sucks, and I'm going to take you under my wing, and I'm going to teach you a thing or two about the game of love, essentially. And so then I'm going to basically make sure that you can process this pain that you experienced, that you can put it into a good context, and that you can use this to maybe learn something that will ensure that you have a better experience in the future. And instead of being shoved down some weird tunnel of YouTube videos that make you angrier and angrier, you end up going on another date with a girl, and having someone who has your back, and then you maybe can learn something about building a relationship with someone, or about just dating and all this kind of stuff. And you have a much better experience, right? I think that is what's supposed to happen. I think that is, if you could design, a human community from scratch, you would never arrive at the point where nobody gets hurt, right? You would never arrive at the point where nobody gets stood up on a date. But you could arrive at a point where there's a way to process these difficult things that leads to a positive outcome.
Yeah, completely agree. I think one key thing that you just mentioned there is having that guide or mentor figure, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's something that really is missing at a large scale. I honestly believe that.
Yeah.
And that role is fulfilled by celebrities, and if not the state. That's what it seems to be like, right? And as you were describing that, because you're absolutely right, like they're essentially engagement algorithms for YouTube and social media at large and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with that is like their goal is for you to be there and watch an ad so they can get paid. Their goal is not your well-being, your anything, any betterment of your life in any shape, way, or form. Mm-hmm. Unless, of course, the content that you're hooked on is self-improvement content or something like that, right? Something that's actively improving you. I wonder what that would look like. The more extreme versions of better content.
Well,
sorry, go ahead. You're going to say something.
Well, I mean, two things. Like, one of them is, I think algorithms are just not very good at serving up actually good content. Because if I look at what YouTube serves me, it still constantly tries to serve me some nonsense. Even though like I'm doing my best to signal, hey, I'm interested in like in-depth, kind of conversations about certain things and stuff like that. I'm trying to signal I'm into this kind of stuff. It still constantly shows me like the amount of my feed that is some, garbage that appeals to like your inner monkey or inner lizard is astonishing if you compare it to my actual viewing habits, So I think algorithms are just not good at that. And the other thing is, like, if you think about what we've just talked about and then picture iPad kids, which is just so normal now, right? Where kids are spending huge amounts of time with an iPad, and they'll be doing things like watching YouTube and playing games and stuff like that, which means that, and I think that's part of where the problem starts, is that this object is what you relate to, because again, in a different context, you have some kind of a problem, you go maybe talk to your parents, or hopefully, I mean, that's another, the atomic family is a bit of a problematic situation, but you should have some kind of a tribe to come back to, where there's people you trust. And for different experiences, you might seek out different people in that tribe to tell them what happened or to seek advice or whatever. But now, how many children have that kind of context? And how many of them basically always come home to an iPad? And so then when something happens, you go to the iPad, you go to YouTube, you type in, or you go to whatever whatever the social media experience is, right? And I think that's part of where the problem starts.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one thing I would add, first thing I want to say was, I guess one of the reasons could be, sounds like I'm defending the YouTube algorithm. If they know that this video, if this person watches it, there's probably a 93% chance that he's going to go down this rabbit hole and just spend days, right?
Exactly.
So again, their incentive is to maximize engagement. So maybe you're not spending enough time watching good content on YouTube.
Yeah. No, I think that is the problem, because
blame you, I'm just joking.
No, but that is exactly the problem. The algorithm is very good at what it does, but it's not, in a sense, it's not good at serving me the kind of content I want, because that's exactly it. If I watch, a 40-hour conversation that's really meaty, then wait, did I say 40 hour or 40 minute? 40-minute conversation.
40 minutes, yeah.
Yeah. That's like really substantial. Then I'm probably not going to go then click the next video. I'm probably going to go away. I'm going to probably step away and think about it or write about it or something. Because it's not the kind of content that makes you go, okay, next. So yeah, the algorithm is good at what it does. And by the way, another thing I want to mention about the YouTube kids or the iPad kids is I'm certainly not blaming the kids, but I'm also not blaming the parents, because the parents are also stuck in the human zoo, and very likely the reason their kid is spending all day in front of the iPad is because they have to work some crappy job. Where and they're being asked to do overtime and not getting paid, and housing prices and rental prices are rising and wages aren't rising, and all this stuff keeps people trapped, right? So I'm not even blaming the parent. It's like, probably I wouldn't know what else to do in your situation either, unless, and that brings us back to where we started, unless you manage to break free first, unless you manage to somehow have the financial and time and location freedom where you can say, you know what? If my priority is to be around my kid, I'm going to do that. And if I need to move countries because there's a better school or something, or just a better system, a better context to raise my kid, I can. But how many people have that freedom?
Yeah. You're absolutely right. To be fair, I don't know, maybe I just know the wrong kind of people. But a lot of the people I know, they just have kids because they just have kids, because that's what you do. Right. And then the few people I know who actually want to have kids, they obviously do everything they can for their children, right? Like, what parent, it's never in question that a parent, I guess ideally, but I don't think a parent would ever want something negative for their child.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Also, maybe there should be some kind of established age where you can begin interacting with technology, because there's a massive benefit to being a tech native too, right?
For sure, yeah. But that is something that
perhaps not 2 years old.
Yeah. No, and that's something that I think Jonathan Haidt, who's a psychologist, and I've heard a bunch of other people in the field of psychology and researchers in this field basically advocate this. Look, you ideally don't allow social media until 16 or 18 or something. And the thing is, you can still be a tech native without being exposed to social media. I mean, everybody who came before 2012 or whenever social media took off had that experience where, being a tech native meant that you for me, it meant things like learning how to build a computer and learning how to interact with command line prompts and stuff like that. And even learning things, there's so much tech you can use that is entirely positive, It's I feel like, for example, all of the experience I have, learning Photoshop, learning design tools, all this kind of stuff, that's great. That is, it's all positive. It's all upside. I don't think there's any downside. And it's also true for most of the digital media I've consumed. It's like having access to books and having access to people's writings and so on. There is so much upside in the tech world. But unfortunately, it's like the toxic social media part is just totally dominant.
Yeah. True. And it's their business model that has to change. Like, that's what Tristan Harris says, and I completely agree with him. Like, as long as anything we're using is for free, like, this is the part people don't connect. You are the product at that point, right? And again, you can't just blame someone and be like, oh, why don't you know better? Because you don't.
Yeah. No, it's difficult to solve. It's difficult to solve. And actually, like we talked about 2 episodes back, it's even worse than you being the product, right? If only you were the product, it's even worse than that. But you can go watch, what is it, episode 33, I think we talk about that.
Okay. And one last comment, I guess, on the algorithm stuff. Well, I guess 2 comments. Right now, we're talking about an algorithm as like this actual entity. I suppose it is. Like, this is the precursor to AI. Imagine this conversation 100 years from now when we actually have artificial general intelligence. Anyways, I just thought of that.
By then, we'll all just be slaves plugged into the system somehow.
I was just going to say, it seems like we're already in the Matrix, where by default, you're at a screen watching an ad, unless you choose to do something about it.
We're in the Matrix. It just doesn't look as cool as in the movie.
Yeah, we can't fly. We can't dodge bullets or anything.
Yeah. Damn.
We don't have the cool black coats.
We're in the lame version of the Matrix. God damn it.
So I'm going to try to attempt this right now. The reason I say it this way is because I have no idea how I'm going to drive this conversation here. And I guess I just did it by saying this, using this super lame segue.
Okay. I'm ready.
The thing I wanted to, the reason I had brought up all the society level stuff and all that stuff was because to bring it back to masculinity, essentially, right? Like, I wish I could speak for women. I just don't know what their experience is like. I'm sure if I spoke to someone, they would have just as many valid points of how difficult their experience is, right? I don't discount that. And the reason I say that is because what I find as I have grown older and become more mature, I have gravitated towards the older, more orthodox style of masculinity, like more towards stoicism, more towards, like in episode 28, I think you and Ollie talked about depression and anxiety. And one of the things you had mentioned was like, for me, it's like, okay, as long as I have mild, medium depression, I'm just going to suck it up and deal with it. And then once it comes to a point where I can no longer live life, like I can finally acknowledge it, right? So I really resonate with that. Now, I'm not saying that's the right way to do it, but
not the best approach, but that's how it is, yeah.
Yeah, that's how it is, right? And now that's like one negative aspect of this version of masculinity. What are some positive aspects? Make shit happen. Like competition, domination in terms of like, in terms of competition, actually, you go in, you're like, I'm going to dominate my opponents or whatever, right? Coming out on top, making shit happen, being the quote unquote man. And I don't even know if that's like politically correct to say anymore. But anyways, being aggressive, competitive, the will to win, the drive, the ambition, the desire to like just grab your opponent and tear them apart. Not literally, but you know what I'm saying, right? I find that these traits are heavily disincentivized in society today, but at the same time, simultaneously revered, right? Like, do you really think someone like Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and even like firefighters, soldiers, like, do you really think these guys are going out, okay, if my opponent, as a soldier, if my opponent doesn't want to sit and talk about it over a tea party, I'll shoot the fucking guy, right? Like, no, they're going out, we're going to kill. So these people are respected, but at the same time, these masculine traits are, well, labeled as toxic, right? So
Yeah.
the conclusion that I draw from this, it's like the evolution of the Industrial Revolution and the civilizing of man. Now it's like the castration of man, like completely remove all any forms of ambition and drive and whatnot. But when push comes to shove, let's say you're the traditional, by traditional I mean stereotypical guy who gets married, has 2 kids, a car, a white picket fence, a fucking dog, and then for some reason your wife cheats, and it's like it's your fault, right? It's like, but I did everything I was supposed to do. I did everything right. I got the job. I got everything, and it's like, oh, you're just not man enough. Like that's usually what it is. You're boring or whatever the fuck it is, right? So the reason I bring this up is because instead of blaming people for not having the results that they want in their life, I do see it as how we were describing as the outcome of the current system that we have, right? And there are 2 ways we can deal with this. One is we can wait to have a system that facilitates us living an enriched, fulfilled life until YouTube gets its shit together and stops trying to harvest our time and attention, essentially. Or we can take control of our lives now and make shit happen. Now, because last point, because these traits are labeled or are now being associated with a negative connotation, do you think this is, or how do you think this affects men's abilities to have that sort of positive drive and make shit happen sort of attitude when they're constantly told this is wrong?
Yeah. I definitely think we have a problem with this. Like, we don't have any good frameworks for people to be masculine in a healthy way. And unfortunately, it creates those extremes, essentially, right? It's like either you try to be... and yeah, I think this is also something that I think most women are probably not aware of, how deep this kind of masculinity shaming goes. But I think it's parallel, it's like women are shamed for other stuff, and there's like this implicit stuff that can cut really deep. And I think we are pretty unaware of what those things are and what it's like for women, and they're unaware of what it's like for us. But we basically don't have a healthy way of dealing with this. And like you say, it's almost like our society is kind of schizophrenic about it, because on the one hand, there's a lot of shaming and a lot of talk about toxic masculinity, but it's just because toxic masculinity exists doesn't mean that all masculinity is toxic, and that's kind of the message that goes lost. And there's very little in terms of like alternatives, Well, okay, there's a lot of messaging about don't this, don't that, don't, all the stuff you're not supposed to do, all the stuff that's bad, but there's no offering of, well, do this instead, focus on this instead. No, it's just, and like you say, at the same time, of course, we revere the ultra masculine. We revere the go-getter athlete and the MMA fighter and the cutthroat CEO to some level, right? So yeah, I think this is, in terms of what to do about it, I mean, I think this is where, we talked about the regrets of the dying in the last episode, and it's like, one of the regrets is one of the top regrets of the dying is I wish I hadn't lived my life for other people, or I wish I had lived for myself. So I think it's a very bad idea to just try to conform. Okay, so let me say that as my first recommendation. Don't conform. I think people tend to regret that. And so we have, let's say, the mainstream culture, and I think we should give very little energy to trying to conform to mainstream culture, and instead think about what is good for me, what is good for people close to me, what culture and tribe do I want to create? And yeah, that's like, for me, one of the ways I think about it is that, like, well, I try to be that role model for other people in my life. Okay, I try to offer an alternative that is neither toxically masculine which, all expressions of toxic masculinity come from weakness and fear. And I'm not a fan of being weak and fearful, right? So it's like that's the reason I don't do that. It's not because someone wagged their finger at me and said, "Ooh, toxic masculinity," right? And I try to show, basically, I try to live by example, essentially, and I try to provide guidance where I say, look, this is Shane's version of how to be masculine in a way that is neither toxic nor castrated. And let me also say, I think a big problem is, like, when you were describing some of these masculine traits, I think a big problem is that we can't acknowledge the beauty in that. Because yes, of course, there's also like aggression and brutality in it sometimes, but there's something really beautiful about like a pure masculine expression. And it's something that we don't acknowledge and we don't celebrate. And I actually think the same is true for women. I think that we have, or femininity, we have very few ways in which to really like acknowledge and celebrate like the beauty of feminine expression. It's almost always weighed down with something, it's almost always like it's like, it always goes hand in hand with slut shaming and stuff like that, So I think in general, we're just, and again, this is human zoo stuff. I think we've just fucked ourselves up a little bit with how we treat like masculinity and femininity in general. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure what I can say here that's useful. I think that what's really good to explore is like fear. Okay, what behavior is driven by fear? Because like an authentic, pure expression is not going to be fear driven. And like I said, I think this is kind of the thing that distinguishes toxic masculinity. It's like overt aggression, punching down, threatening and bullying those who are smaller and weaker than you. Like, why would you do that if you weren't afraid? Someone who's not afraid has no desire to do that. Someone who's not afraid and isn't hurt has no desire to, bark loudly and thump their chest and bully others in an attempt to appear strong. Someone who knows that they're strong doesn't need to do that, obviously, right? So that is what I would look for, is like, look for areas in your life where you feel some kind of an urge to express, and ask yourself, is there fear behind this or not? And if there's not fear behind this and it doesn't harm anyone, then it doesn't matter whether someone else thinks you ought to be like this or you ought to do like this. Then you should definitely go your own way in that sense.
Yeah, very good point. And I think I'd like to add to what you mentioned. Like, when you're operating from fear, you're trying to push and bully people down. When you're operating from strength, you're trying to actively lift everyone around you, right?
Yeah.
And another thing that I really liked that you mentioned was it comes down to the lack those guide/mentor figures and those role models, right? Yeah, there's a lot missing in the world. And I think the main reason that I wanted to ask this question was like, how much do you think this contributes to like procrastination and low self-worth and low self-esteem and whatnot, right? Like people who are already feeling like, fuck, I have no idea how I'm getting out of these circumstances. I need to do this and I have no idea how to do this. And anytime I try, I'm getting like, I'm told I'm, whatever for it.
It can be very inhibiting,
Yeah, exactly. So I think, I know a lot of this could seem like it's not related to goal accomplishment and how to actually achieve freedom, but it really is, because all of these things it's like trying to run with these bowling balls that you're holding and not acknowledging them at all, and constantly asking everyone around you, how come I can't run faster? It's like, dude, drop the weight. What weight?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and also that is by itself a form of freedom, right? Like freedom from the need to please other people and freedom from the need to conform to other people and so on is a very significant form of freedom. Yeah, you're right. I mean, for that, like, I have not found anything better than No More Mr. Nice Guy, that book. That's a good book,
To get over the... Yeah. for those tendencies and whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough.
Also, like more generally, I've often found that what works for me, or what seems to work for me, is that when I feel this kind of lack, right, like you're saying, like there's a lack of this kind of mentorship, this kind of role model in my life, or there's a lack of, I don't know, something, empathy, kindness, or something in my life. What seems to work really well for me is if I ask myself, how can I be the person for someone else who I wish I had, you know? That seems to be a great way to kind of overcome maybe some of those inhibitions or overcome some of the trauma or something associated with it. And again, it's also like controlling what you can control. Like I can't magically make someone appear in my life who gives me what I need, but I can think about, well, how can I become this person? And somehow that seems to be a worthwhile path.
Yeah, completely agree. And the thing you're mentioning, okay, this is what came to mind. Like over the weekend, I just finished reading Delivering Happiness by Tony Hsieh.
Mm-hmm.
He talked about how he would study the science of happiness, right? So I'm like, okay, let's try. I just YouTubed it, what makes people happy and what makes people unhappy. One thing I found is that smart people are on average more unhappier because they just know so many more ways that things can go wrong. They're highly aware.
Solution:
So
hit
I thought that
yourself
was
with a
fun.
brick.
Exactly. Be dumber. um, and I found this really interesting TED talk. I wish I could remember the guy's name, but he talks about a 75-year-long study done on happiness.
Oh yeah,
And
that's
there
the
were
Harvard study. Yeah.
Yeah. There were two subjects. Yeah, I mean, two groups. One is like the Harvard kids from the 30s, and the other one is like these poor Boston kids. And he's like, well, when we ask millennials, what do you think would make you happy out of life? They're like, two things: being rich and being famous. Respect. Then he's like, well, he's like, guess what? When we asked the Harvard kids and the Boston kids back then, because they were in their 20s, right? Like, what do you think would make you happy in life? And they said two things: being rich and being famous. And yeah, anyways, the guys, like, we told them that we're going to be studying your life for however long, I guess, in the entirety of it.
Mm-hmm.
And the Boston kids were like, yeah, but my life isn't that interesting. Why would you want to study mine? And he's like, interestingly, the Harvard kids never said that.
Yeah,
So
that's
yeah,
a good TED talk. We should
eventually,
link to that.
yeah, I definitely will. I'll send it there. And so eventually, he's like, we found over time that guys, now that they're in their 80s or whatever, he's like, there's one clear, strong indicator for happiness, right? And he's like, can anyone guess what that is? People, I wonder what. He's like, ooh. Now I'm thinking, should I spoil it or should I leave it for the nose?
No,
I'll
let's
tell the story.
do it.
Yeah, I'll tell the story. Okay. And he's like, what they found was people, regardless of wealth or status or anything, people who had better quality relationships in their life were happier across the board.
Mm-hmm.
And that could mean your friendships, your family, your significant other, your wife, husband, whatever, anything with that. Like, the better the quality of relationships people had in their life, the better, the more happy they were in the long run.
Yeah.
And yeah, the way that relates to what we're saying is like, when you say, okay, I see this lack of this specific type of role model or this specific type of advice, when you become that person for someone, you have just enriched a relationship for two people, yourself and the person who's going to look for that next, right?
Yeah.
By doing that, you're adding to yours and their happiness.
Yeah, and this is why one of the Icario principles, like this is why we're a team of people, and one of the principles is about building your tribe, like building your community, and doing that proactively, right? It's like unfortunately, we can't grow up with the expectation to have a good, strong tribe of people and like that support system and so on around ourselves. Like many of us just don't have this. But I think it is one of like the underrated keys to success and keys to good life is to build your tribe and do it deliberately. And yeah, that's one of the things you can do, is obviously you can forge connections with good people, but also you can make sure that you're that kind of person. You can make sure that because you want to have a tribe of excellent, badass people around you. And well, guess who they want to have in their tribe? They want to have other excellent, badass people in their tribe. So it's like, make yourself worthy of the greatest of social circles. But do it while you're building it, right? Do it while you're building it. Don't, again, perfectionism, right? Don't think I have to achieve all these things before I start building. Do both at the same time.
Yeah. So true. You remind me of the saying, it's like, instead of looking for the one, be the one. Right? People have this thing, I gotta find the one. No, be the one. That someone else will be like, whoa, boom. They would never want to let you go. I mean, if that's your goal, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, these are all the topics, literally everything I could think of that I wanted to throw at you and get your opinion on. I hope this ties into, at this point, I really do hope it ties into freedom and what it means to live a good life and how to be happy long term. I think that's definitely something to focus on actively. If we don't, we can't just expect to be happy as default. I mean, as evident by society. So yeah, so I think we've covered pretty much everything.
I'm interested to see what our listeners think about all this. So I'd love to hear any comments, any questions you have. There are a couple of ways in which you can get in touch. You can, if you're watching this on YouTube, obviously, you can leave a comment there. You can also go to the show notes of this episode, which is going to be ikario.com/035. You can leave a comment there, or you can go to anchor.fm/Ikario, and there you can leave a voice message. So that's also something, if you have a question or something that you want to feature on a future podcast episode, you can go to anchor.fm/Ikario. There's a message button there where you can record a voice message. So we'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to know what you've taken away from these conversations, and if you have anything to add or any questions. And with that, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.